Today we are interviewing Janet Bollum, owner of the Muse Bookstore, for the West Volusia Historical Society Oral History Project. My name is Kathy Hirsch. I will be doing the interview, and the date today is May 27th, 2025. Thank you, Janet, very much for coming and agreeing to share your life story with the project.
Okay, you're welcome.
To get started, let's talk about where you were born and raised.
I was born in Chisholm, Minnesota, which is up on the Iron Range in northern Minnesota. But I was basically raised in Brainerd, Minnesota, which is the center of the lakes area.
And what was your childhood like?
Oh, well, I was raised with 4 siblings. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad worked for Northwestern Bell, so we had a very middle-class, normal, wonderful upbringing in a small town that was basically the same size as DeLand was when I first came here in 1980. And it was a college town too, so there's a lot of similarities.
Tell us about where you went to school and what that was like. Was it big? Was it, do you remember any?
College?
No, elementary.
Oh, elementary, I went to Edison Elementary School, which last time I was in Brainerd for my class reunion is now a retirement center. I said I could have started and stopped right there. But we walked to school. It was a small town, and my elementary school was probably about 6 blocks away. My junior high was probably about 2 miles away, and Brainerd High School was probably about a mile away. So come spring, summer, winter, snow, we walked to school.
So you can legitimately say, I walked to school in snow, knee deep. And
oh yeah, oh yeah.
So tell us about then, you went away to college?
Right, well, I first went to the community college, which was there in Brainerd. And then I graduated from Moorhead State, which is in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is part of the University of Minnesota system, with a degree in mathematics, major in mathematics, minor in PE.
So what was your first job then, teaching?
Well, yes. I was recruited by the Australian government right out of college, and I spent the next 2.5 years teaching at Monash High School in Melbourne, Australia.
That must have been very exciting and quite a change.
It was. That was before cell phones and everything, so it's very far away. So it was after 2.5 years. I could have stayed, but I came home.
So you didn't get to call home very often then?
No, in fact, we sent cassette tapes back and forth. I'd talk on the tape for a little bit, and then I'd send it to my mom and dad, and they'd pass it around, and then they'd talk on the tape and send it back to me.
What was it like in Australia then?
Oh, I loved Australia. Australia is very different. You know, the foliage, the animals. I did a lot of hiking. I climbed Ayers Rock, which you can't do anymore. I went to Alice Springs. I was one of the first 10 women to abseil Dannybrook Falls in the Blue Mountains out of Sydney. I hiked all of New Zealand. So it was a very fun, energetic time. By the time I left, I was a senior math teacher at the high school. They were a bit.
Why did they recruit you from so far away?
Why did what?
Why did they recruit you from so far away?
Okay, well, the short story is there was a shortage at that time was 1972, and in 1972 there was a glut of teachers in the U.S. and there was a shortage of teachers in Australia, and there was a woman who taught education at Berkeley, out in California. And she had all these wonderful educators graduating under her and couldn't find jobs. And she had contacts in the Australian government. So she contacted them and she said, really, could you use some teachers? And they said, send me 600. Well, she was from Minnesota, so she recruited in 2 places, Berkeley, California, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was the strangest interview I ever went to. And then I had the choice. I had 2 job offers. I could have stayed in Minnesota and taught there, or spent the next 2 years in Melbourne, Australia. So it wasn't a hard decision.
When you came back, did you have a readjustment period too?
Yeah, that's kind of why I ended up in Florida. You know, Melbourne, Australia, although it's backwards, seasons are backwards, the climate's very similar to here. So when I went back, yeah, it was a bit of an adjustment. But I taught there for I stayed there for another 5 years. And then I came to Florida.
And you, when did you get married and how did you meet your husband?
We were high school sweethearts. He was captain of the football team and I was a cheerleader. Very classic. And he was a football player, and he graduated from North Dakota State University and I graduated from Morehead State. We got married right out of college and went to Australia together.
So you went back to Australia?
No, when I went there, I was recruited, but if I agreed to stay for a minimum of 2 years, then you could bring a spouse.
And what did he do there?
Well, he finished his teaching degree over there, and then he taught also.
Math?
No, history.
History. So, what made you decide to come to DeLand, and when was that?
Well, we opened the bookstore, the Muse, in July 1st of 1980. We followed my parents to Florida after suffering a few blizzards in northern Minnesota. I decided maybe Florida was a good transition, and we came here with the idea of buying a bookstore. Because when we were teaching in Australia, it was tax-free. So we came back with a bit of savings, and with that savings, that was the plan. And we looked around Central Florida, because my parents were living in Orlando at the time. And then my husband got hired by Walden Books when they opened the Ponce de Leon Mall in St. Augustine. It was the very first mall up there, which I don't even think is open anymore. But there was a Walden Books in there, and he was hired to work at Walden Books. So we lived in St. Augustine for 6 months. And of course, St. Augustine to Orlando, Florida, 1792, happens to go right through DeLand. And there happened to be a kind of sort of bookstore for sale here. And we looked at it. We first turned it down because there was a lot of stuff in there. And then the people who had it pretty much gave it to us. So we changed the name. It was McVicker's Books, Cards, and Gifts. And of course, we're in the Athens of Florida. So we settled on the Muse, as in Greek mythology, the 9 muses. So that's how the Muse Bookshop came about. And then so this is our 45th year.
Congratulations.
And it evolved into a real bookstore. And then it evolved into a new and antiquarian bookstore. So over the years, it's evolved to meet the needs, I hope, of this community.
So your husband and you worked together at the bookstore?
Well, he pretty much worked the bookstore. At that time, I was the coordinator of adult high school at DBCC. So I taught
Can
math.
you say what the initials stand for?
Daytona Beach Community College, it was at the time. Well, now it's Daytona Beach State College. And I taught GED, gave the GED tests, taught math, taught high school and college math, and was the adult high school coordinator. I did that for 5 years, and I quit when my daughter was really young, because I could raise my 2 kids at the bookstore, not at the college.
So how did that work out?
Well, if you know the Muse Bookshop, you know there's a little back room, and that became a nursery. And so, yeah, it worked out. You could be a kind of sort of stay-at-home mom and still work.
Well, you certainly had a lot of books at hand to read to them if you had time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they're both bibliophiles. Both of them are readers, avid readers, yeah.
So did you go through any boom and bust times with the bookstore?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The 90s were wonderful. It has never been what it was in the 90s. When we opened in the 80s, downtown DeLand, you've heard, it was aptly referred to as dead land. And it was high vacancies, but we had McCrory's, we had JCPenney's, we had Dreggors, we had Woolworths, all of which are not there anymore. So you had those as anchors, and they eventually kind of went away. Woolworths was the last to go. But then in '85, we became the first Mainstreet city in Florida. I was very involved in that too. And that was a catalyst with additional funding from the state and expertise. We continued to build on the economic vitality of downtown. So by the 90s, it was really good. 2001 took a dive. And
any reason why?
Well, it was 9/11. And then the economy pretty much tanked over the next 5 years. And then it's never really gotten back to where it was, for me, it's never been as good as, because not for the sales aren't good, it's that as sales go up, expenses go up, you know, so we're pretty much at probably an even keel that we were. But in the 90s, you know, expenses were very minimal. And there was no internet, there was no Amazon, there was no big boxes. So a independent local bookstore had more of an appeal to the general public.
You said that the Muse is the oldest commercial concern in
Right.
DeLand?
It's the longest operating, right now, at 45 years. I am the longest continuing retail merchant in downtown.
You said you were involved in the Mainstreet activities. Would you say that you were one of the leaders in that?
Yeah, well, when I came to DeLand, the first thing I did was join the West Volusia Historical Society in 1980. So that was my first membership. I went to when the state picked DeLand as the first Mainstreet, and then I was on the initial coordinating committee. I put on the first, it was called the Rivertown Festival at that time, but it was the first Mainstreet festival in downtown DeLand. I was the promotions coordinator. But I've been on and off the board. I've been president for most of its 40 years now.
Tell us about the impersonations that you did, acting with Bill Dreggors. Tell us
Yeah.
about Bill Dreggors and how you got involved with him.
Well, when we joined the Historical Society, there weren't very many women members at that time. There weren't a lot of members at that time. But what happened, it was, it was by the request of Bill. Bill Dreggors was an incredible storyteller. And he had a wealth of knowledge of this area of in Volusia County as a fourth or fifth, I don't know, generation Floridian. He was born here. So, and he was a storyteller. So he asked me to do it with him. And the first dress I had was the purple dress. I don't know if you've seen that one. I got out at the Volusia County Fairgrounds, and it had one of those skirts, you know. And the second dress was given to Bill Dreggors. It was actually a dress that was donated to the Historical Society from the late 1800s. And that was that black quilted outfit I wore. So I had to do a lot of studying because Bill forgot I wasn't, many times he'd forget I wasn't born and raised in DeLand and knew all that he did. So I read all the books, Helen DeLand's book. He asked me to become Helen DeLand, and we did the Henry and Helen show countless times. I'm sure you've seen the one we did with Doug Lee. And
We've only been here 5 years, so
okay, well,
we missed that.
Yeah, well, we did, it's on tape somewhere here. The history of DeLand, we did a pretty extensive video on as Henry and Helen. But
Did you do live presentations?
Oh, all the time.
And were those
with
well
the Women's
received?
Club, you know, at the Kiwanis set. Yeah, they were. They were very well received.
So people learned a lot of DeLand history through your reenactments.
Yeah, and then whenever there was a festival, we wandered as Henry and Helen. He always referred to me as daughter. He doesn't have a daughter, so so I became his daughter, and we did a lot of. Whenever there was something going on downtown, he'd want us to walk around and introduce ourselves and tell the kids how old we were, and you know.
Did the children think you were really those people?
Well, you get some wide eyes every once in a while. You say, you know, well, I was born in 1869. You know, I was, you know. Yeah, we did. Got a lot of wide eyes, but.
Do you see anything in your bringing up that influenced you to be involved or love history?
Yeah. My dad was very involved. He was chairman of the school board. He handed me my high school diploma when I graduated. My dad was very involved in the local community, which I think, you know, there were times when I spoke, because I was a city commissioner for 6 years. I was on the Volusia Council of Governments. I chaired the MPO. I was on the Cultural Arts Center when we opened the Cultural Arts Center up here. So I was involved in a lot of things, and I think, and I always put that back on my father, because he always was.
He set the example.
Yeah, he did.
So you have children?
I have two. I have a boy and a girl. My son now is 48. My daughter is 30. My daughter just turned 40. No, 39. She might catch me for that one.
And do they live nearby?
My daughter lives here in DeLand. My daughter Ella. My son Justin is the airport manager up in Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is right outside of DC. So they live up there.
I think your daughter had a shop behind your bookstore for a while.
She did. She did. She had a shop there for about 5 years. And now she runs a yoga studio downtown.
She runs which?
A yoga studio.
Studio. Okay.
The yoga shed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you, in the 45 years that you've been a business person, run a business here in DeLand and been involved in a lot of civic activities, what would you say have been the major changes?
Our streetscape, I was very involved in that. I was chairman of the MPO when we got the sidewalks done. And I think the walkability, it was to improve the walkability of downtown. We've seen I always tell people, downtown DeLand, when you walk in any place, whether it's a restaurant or something, you pretty much meet the owner. What we have is locally owned and operated, except for Checkers on one hand and Firehouse Subs on the other. Everything in the middle, pretty much, is local. So I've seen an evolution of very unique shops. I've seen an evolution of wonderful restaurants. I hardly ever leave downtown when I go out to dinner. I don't need to. When I first moved here, there was 2 pizza places and a small cafe. That was about it.
I'd like to go back to your reenactments with Bill Dreggors. It sounds like a living history, a living museum type of thing where people walk around from another era.
Yeah, when we did, like I said, Bill Dreggors, I always had to be up on things. And a lot of times he would think that I knew the stories, but we tell the stories about the early settlers, how all the streets were named after certain people when he first came here, and he stayed in the rich cabin. But one time we were at the women's club and we were talking, and we would banter back and forth, you know. And he was talking about the first schoolhouse in DeLand. And he turned to me and he said, now Helen, what was the first teacher we had? I drew a blank. So, you know, which happens, so I turned back to him and I said, Dad, who was that? He drew a blank. And if you remember, his wife, Jo, was sitting out in the audience with my 4-year-old Ella, because she took care of her when we went to these things, and she's in there, Amelia late. So every once in a while we'd mess up, but pretty much we'd catch each other, or I'd pull him back on track because he tended to wander. If you've ever been to one of Bill Dreggors' spiels, he would go off on stories. And if you had a script, you'd have to kind of pull him back in. And that was my job.
It was challenging, I'm sure.
It was, because he could talk.
About the fact that most of the restaurants and businesses are locally owned, was it a struggle to keep the big box stores out of the downtown area?
Well, we did have a big fight over the Walmart, and there isn't a location in downtown DeLand, but we wanted DeLand Central to be the shopping center, the center. So, but you know, malls come and go, and ours have certainly come and gone. And they always went further out and further out. But we've managed to maintain, and I think most of that is due to Mainstreet, the events we have. I was also on the board of the West Volusia Tourist Advertising Authority, and they make great commitments to downtown DeLand, to events and whatever's going on, bringing people in.
I do see a lot of tourists. I mean, they're fairly obvious, you know, looking around. And so What do you think the draw is for people?
Well, we're the #1 Main Street city in Florida, and we've gotten a lot of good press for that. And I think we're more like, I refer to as old Florida, not new Florida, not the manufactured communities where you know, there's the aesthetics, which we worked on very hard when Main Street started, with a lot of help from the Secretary of State's office, to redo the facades and clean up the facades and bring back, even though we have a little problem right now with our brick, because it's Lake Helen sand brick, but the ambiance of downtown has pretty much stayed. And also, I think, you know, Stetson University, you have to acknowledge that they are aesthetically a big contributing factor to DeLand, and have a wonderful music school. They have events going on there all the time. So you've got a very active social and entertainment scene. We revived the Athens Theater. You have that, which brings in a lot of good plays and events.
What about race relations in DeLand over the past 45 years?
Well, I come from Minnesota. I come from northern Minnesota. There were no blacks when I grew up in my hometown. So I was a little taken aback when I first came here, because there was, I think it's something that's a work in progress still. But back when I came in 1980, it was different. I was surprised at the friction between the two communities.
What kind of friction?
You know, well, I could tell you a story, but I'm not going to, because it was very unpleasant experience I had. Not myself, but witnessing, you know, other people interacting. But I think we've always tried to, in downtown, we've always tried to envelop that community, and we've always wanted to bring them into the commercial core. And we certainly have had some commercial endeavors down there. And of course, they're still working on the Wright Building and all that area, and the African American Museum. I was a member of that also. And so I think things are improving, but with everything, I think it's all a work in progress.
What do you know about the Wright Building? It seems to have kind of stalled.
That you'd have to talk to Mark Shuttleworth, who's kind of but it's always, well, they rescued the Wright Building because it was going to come down, and I think, and the church is very involved there, and they've certainly got grant funding, but I think funding is becoming more difficult for that type of thing. But I think the building is stable, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but it was supposed to, I think the plan was for it to be an incubator for businesses, mm-hmm. for African American businesses.
So, what do you see happening here in terms of development? Do you have any concerns about?
Oh, I have lots of concerns. You know, housing never pays for itself, and it doesn't seem to register with our city and county commissioners. They just keep building out and developing more. My concern is about our water, and I'm also concerned about this area of Florida is really known for its natural beauty. The beaches, the St. Johns River, And I think there should be more emphasis put on preservation rather than development. That's my opinion.
And as there are, as the population of people who were born and raised here declines and is displaced by newer folk coming in, how do you see getting them interested in a history which they weren't really involved in?
Well, I came in and I was very interested in history and very involved in, and I think it's an outreach. I think once people know how unique and how colorful our history was here, they'll want to learn more. As a bookstore owner, I can tell you that we are very fortunate here to have so much literal history of our area. A lot of it through the West Volusia Historical Society, through individuals. We have a better section than I've ever seen in another bookstore of local history, of area history.
And people buy the books.
And people buy the books, yes.
I've noticed also in the museum bookstore, there's a lot of history books, local history for sale.
Yeah. Yep.
And outreach to schools, perhaps. Did you go into schools with your act, with Bill Dreggors?
We didn't do much of schools because I was limited to timing. You know, we did at Barberville whenever there was a settlement event going on up there. We did a lot up at Barberville, which of course was a lot of interaction, families, schools. But I didn't go into schools much with Bill because of my constraints of working during the day, during school hours.
So, what advice would you have for young people today about community involvement or anything that strikes you as important?
Yeah, I would hope that, you know, people today would dream big, get involved, don't sit on the sidelines, step in the fray, but be kind when you do.
That's important.
Yes.
And what do you see as your legacy?
Oh, that's a tough one. I see my legacy as interpreting history in DeLand. I see my legacy with the bookstore. Hopefully I provided a good community center for literary works. And I hope that my involvement in the community has made it a better place.
Have there in the past been any celebrity authors that have come to the bookstore?
Oh, yeah. Tim Dorsey used to come every year. We've had Red Green, Carl Hyacin. We used to do a lot of book signings, but then I rented out the space when I needed more rent money in the back, and so I don't really have an event space anymore. So I seldom do signings anymore, but probably the biggest one would be Carl Hyacin or Red Green. They were really good.
Did a lot of people turn out for Carl Hyacin?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's written a lot of books about Florida.
He's got a new one, just came out.
Oh, really?
Yep.
He's hilarious.
I've listened to him speak many times, and he's actually signed at the bookstore twice. And I did an event over in Daytona with him a couple of years ago. And yeah, he's a great speaker. If you ever have a chance to see Carl Hyacin,
we went,
and he's been here at Stetson.
Oh,
yeah, definitely go. You will be entertained.
Oh, we experienced one of his talks.
Good.
He packed out the Congregational Church in Coral Gables.
Okay, yeah.
And the laughter lifted the roof.
I know, he's really, he's as funny as his books. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you, or a topic that you're concerned about or you would like to address?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I think you've pretty much covered my life story and then some.
Good. You did mention a concern about the water, the environmental concerns here about the water. It really, I think, seemed to have really reached public consciousness about the flooding issues and so
Well, not only the flooding issues, but that's development. You know, I sell topographical maps at the store. People should never buy a lot in this area without, first of all, looking at a topographical map first, and secondly, waiting till it rains really hard, and then go out and look at it. Flooding's one thing, and that's development, but the other thing is our potable water. You know, the wells are moving in. We have an Ormond Beach well right out on 11. A well for Ormond Beach water.
Wow.
So that's saltwater intrusion is also an issue. So it's not just flooding. But flooding is caused by not enough pervious surface. We have so much impervious surface. And that's development. And it changes the direction of where the water goes. When a new development comes in, then the topography changes. They change the topography, build it up. So then the people who are lying low are going to hurt.
Anything else?
My house was built in 1904, and it was on the corner of Woodland Blvd and University, and it was the George Marks house. George Marks was the first superintendent of schools here. So I own two lots, a small house and a lot right behind what used to be University Inn, which is now University Hall. But right next to University Hall, there was an open field there, and then there was an ROTC building, and then there was my house, which was at that time, Stetson got it from the Marx family, and it was a small business administration. It was going to be torn down to build the Cultural Arts Center. So I moved the house over to my lot, and yeah, it's 3 stories high. It's a tall house.
Wow, that was...
Stetson was going to move it. They wanted to move it because at that time, was it Allen Hall had burned down? One of them had burned down. But the problem was they couldn't get it on the boulevard because it was too tall. Whereas my lot, they put it up on rollers and they rolled it past the ROTC building and turned it around in the lot in front of me, which is where the Gumby's financial building is now, and then backed it in.
Was any damage done?
I was amazed that they moved it in one piece. I think maybe one window cracked. The beams underneath are like this, you know, they're heart pine. It's all heart pine. The house is heart pine.
So it's very solid.
Yeah, you can't put a nail in it. But some of the plaster. But as I started renovating the house, you know, I fixed the cracked walls. A little shifting. There's still a little shifting going on, but
wow.
it's built on a new foundation. So.
Uh-huh. One thing when we talked on the phone that I found interesting was your connection to the Ojibwe native group.
Yeah. Back, my grandmother, on my grandmother's side, there's Native American. Ojibwe is Chippewa. Most people know them as Chippewa, not Ojibwe. So when I went back to Minnesota, I was recruited by the Onamia Reservation to teach there. That was in 74, 75, when there was a lot of there was a lot of discussion about applicable education, and there was a lot of things going on in the education system, particularly in Minnesota. So it was an alternative school, and I taught, in the mornings I taught math in the local high school, and the afternoons I taught on the reservation, and because I was the only teacher who had any Native American, I taught Native American language, I taught Native American crafts, I taught Native American, because of my PE minor, you know, games. I taught pottery.
Wow.
Yeah, that all.
Is that
But we
still-
were allowed to hire, when I taught Ojibwe religion, but we were allowed to hire people from the tribe as kind of helpers for us. So when you were teaching Ojibwe language, you would have an elder from the tribe who would actually be working with you.
So you actually can speak Ojibwe?
Oh, I could say Animush, and you know, I could at that time. That was 45 years ago. But I did most of the, you know, lesson plans, whereas the Native American, was the Ojibwe elder, would do most of the teaching the actual language. Yeah.
So you would be considered to be 1/4?
I don't know what. Well, it was my grandmother's grandfather, so that would be no less than that, maybe 1/16, something like that.
But you obviously respected.
Oh yeah, I did, and I learned, you know, participated in
That's very interesting.
the ceremonies and stuff. Yeah.
And how are they faring now? Do you know?
Well, they have a casino on the reservation, which is, with a lot of things like that's a plus and a minus. When I taught there, a lot of my students, their homes had dirt floors. You know, it was very poor. We used to have them over for cookouts and at our houses, you know. And but so when the casino came about, then there was money that went into the reservation. So it it improved their housing, and but money doesn't solve a lot of things, but it definitely put them in better straits as far as economics go.